Where do you want to sit?
Just where it goes. Hello, we're going to go ahead and get started today. I appreciate everyone being here tonight. Appreciate everyone who's online joining us today for what we hope to be the first of several informational meetings where we're talking about issues that affect rural Oklahoma. My name is Clay Pope. I'm chairman of the Rural and Small Town Table of Common Interest, and this meeting that we're having this evening is hosted by the Small Town Table of Common Interest, the National Farmers Union, and American Farmers and Ranchers here in Oklahoma. We appreciate again each and every one of you joining us tonight, and hopefully we're going to have a great meeting where we have a lot of information talking a little bit about some of the food chain weaknesses that we're seeing and its impact on the Oklahoma livestock industry. We've got a great group of speakers this evening, and again, like I said, I hope we have a great discussion, and then hopefully by the end of the night, we'll also have an opportunity to have some questions and answers. But to kick us off this evening, to talk a little bit about the Rural and Small Town Table of Common Interest that's recently been formed, I'd like to call to the podium David Walters. David is from Canute, Oklahoma originally, but he's also more importantly, he is the former governor of the state of Oklahoma, longtime champion of rural Oklahoma, and I'd like to have him come forward and talk a little bit about this newly found organization and our goals. Governor Walter, I'll turn the podium over to you.
I don't know if I can match Clay's enthusiasm. Kind of juiced up, charged up. Boy, it's the end of the day, isn't it? Or did you start drinking coffee about 5 o'clock?
That's something like that.
Well, good evening. Welcome to all of you and those folks online. I want to thank Representative Clay Pope for his work in beginning this process and to help us try to understand and do a better job of communicating the issues that affect rural areas and small towns in Oklahoma. Clay's always been an advocate of Oklahoma agriculture, and he combines, as you saw, public policy enthusiasm with kind of the experience of walking the walk. So he makes a great convener for discussions like this. I'm going to talk a little bit about rural issues that worry us. I want to first thank our guests who are here, with Scott Blueball, of course, and Rob LaRue, and they're putting on some miles, getting around the state, checking out all kinds of elements of the agricultural industry, and the other, Terry Dietrich, good to see you again, and all the rest of you. So pleased to be here with you. I grew up on a dirt road out about 2 miles outside of Canute, Oklahoma. I had 4 brothers, and we enjoyed trying to make a living out of that hard red soil. It was both our playground, our livelihood. I knew who my county commissioner was before I knew who the governor was, and always enjoyed my upbringing in Western Oklahoma. I know the work, the hardship, the joy, the independence, and the values of rural Oklahoma. A lot has changed since I was having dirt clod fights with my brothers out there on around the homestead. Now technology is, which is often denied in rural areas or limited in rural areas, offers a great opportunity for education and communications, trade operations, healthcare, and even the attraction to residents and businesses who are looking for a way to get away from the congestion in our urban areas. And yet broadband improvements are limited, and they're needed, and they're rarely a priority. This is a bit of a sore point for me because I passed a big bond issue when I was in office 100 years ago, and financed it with tobacco compacts with Indian tribes, and we put in a slug of money that helped build out the OneNet network in Oklahoma initially that began to connect across the state. The other thing that worries me, though, is we've got lots of options in urban areas to move mail and packages. Rural Oklahoma needs their post offices. And we're worried about this continuing attack on post offices. Rural Oklahoma needs access to health care. Maybe this isn't always a fully equipped hospital. Maybe it's an emergency care center or a mixture of provider facilities. But we really need a plan that puts in place the provision of care that my family experienced every time one of us got injured or hurt or had a health emergency. We were 8 miles away from the Elk City Community Hospital, and off we went. And that kind of access is important for quality of life in rural areas. And as you know, we've lost lots of rural hospitals in Oklahoma in the recent years. How we fund and administer our public schools in rural areas is also important. School consolidation has never been the answer to improving our schools. It's a myth that you save a lot of money when you consolidate all the schools, and those schools provide the identity and the basis and the importance for our rural towns. A couple of comments about trade that, and most of what I know I've learned from Scott Bluebaugh and others, Clay Pope, and other experts in this, but it is important to understand that 20% of our crops and grown and products raised in the United States are exported, and and those hundreds of thousands of jobs that are dependent on that export depends on a stable and consistent and a sensible trade negotiations. Farmers and ranchers and their communities have paid a heavy price for unstable negotiations. Farm bankruptcies jumped 20% in 2019, as you all are fully aware. We need more strong and effective trade negotiations and enforcement, and less of the erratic and inconsistent approach to international trade that can be so damaging to our markets. We need to strengthen antitrust enforcement. I suspect we'll hear a little bit about that tonight. From the feedstock and seeds to the markets where the products are sold, farmers and ranchers are being hurt by the increasing market concentration. This is not inevitable. In fact, it's unusual. It's critical that one of our national priorities is to provide access to farmers and ranchers and the producers to fair markets where they can compete and get fair prices for their products, and require large corporations to play by the rules instead of writing them. We were just having a conversation about Mars Bar and the peanut industry, and Terry was explaining how the peanut industry got wiped out in Oklahoma. Well, it had a lot to do with large corporations writing the rules. Strengthening and enforcement of the Sherman and Clayton Antitrust Acts and the Tackers and Stockyards Act is critically important. We need to do much more to help beginning farmers. America tries in so many ways to make it easy to start a business, but unless you inherit the land, it's much more difficult to start a farm. We need to expand the federal microloan program for new and beginning farmers, dramatically increase the maximum loan amount that's available, increase funding for USDA's farm ownership and operating loans, all of this to help beginning farmers who grew up on a family farm but need some low-cost capital to try to add to the family farm's operation so it can support another household. Simple as that. Many people promote the development of regional food systems. I think it's an intriguing idea that small and mid-sized farmers and ranchers, for that matter, can create supply chains to deliver fresh produce and other products to local schools and hospitals and state and federal institutions. This would create those opportunities to negotiate their own prices, fair prices, identifying markets for specialty crops and secondary products, all critical to finding niches in a very challenging industry. I'm in the power generation business. I compete with large utilities half the time. Well, when I'm competing with a large utility, either in the US or overseas, I'm going to get blown away because I'm a small capitalized company. But when I find that niche, when I can provide maybe to the mining operations in Asia, or if I can find a community that's isolated, then we can do our business and do quite well at it. Finally, we need to help farmers and ranchers leverage new technologies, techniques, and equipment to increase productivity and profit. I know you all know a lot about this, but the Conservation Stewardship Program, as I hear rumblings out of this new administration upcoming, looks like that's going to get expanded and increased significantly, and we're interested and excited to hear that. So the list is long and merits discussion about priorities and plans, which you all are going to have tonight. Not all roads lead to the government, but many of them do. And so this gathering today to discuss beef industry consolidation and concentration and its impact on rural areas and small town living is a great start in this process. The bottom line is that livestock producers need our leaders to ensure that we never again have a situation like we did this spring. Food lines in major cities, grocery store shelves going bare, retail pricing going up while prices to farmers and ranchers are going down, and crops are being plowed under and animals being slaughtered for disposal. Never want to see that again. None of us do. And so we've got to accept this identification of that weakness in our system, the concentration that got us to that point, and do something about it. Producers have to have the stability and continuity they need to survive, particularly during times of low commodity prices. I hope all of us can begin to envision a bright future for rural communities, particularly here in Oklahoma, investing in the next generation of agriculture and conservation, where urban businesses and residents are enabled by technology to do what they do in cities, but to do it in small towns and rural areas, bringing in new sources of economic activity to our small towns, where it's easier to pass farms and ranches on to the next generation, and where the kids waving at the road grader and the county commissioner can grow up in their community and make a good living and have a great life in rural Oklahoma. That's my dream, and the reason I don a mask and drive out here to El Reno. Gosh, it's longer than I thought it was. It said 37 minutes, but I hit traffic. We welcome our distinguished participants here today, and we thank you for your attention and interest to these important matters. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Governor, and we appreciate your support in trying to bring light to some of these issues. Let's go ahead and let's get started with the rest of our agenda with our first speaker, who will be joining us via the magic of modern technology. Michael Kelsey with the Oklahoma Cattlemen's Association will be joining us here on our link. I believe that we're
Okay, I think I'm good to go. I apologize. I cannot hear. I could hear Governor Walters and Clay earlier. Okay, I'm getting the signal that I'm on, and I appreciate that. So hopefully you all can hear me. Let me begin by saying thank you so much for the opportunity to jump in here. I'm in Arapahoe. I'm sitting in a pickup. Actually, I'm in just north of Arapahoe, Oklahoma. And we are in the process of our fall gatherings. We have 12 fall gatherings around the state, and Clay and his colleagues, my good friend Scott, and so forth, were generous enough to allow me to, through as Clay, you said, the magic of technology, to jump in here and share some thoughts on this very, very important subject. Even though I can't be there with you in person, I would really like to be there with you in person. To share in the discussion, and I apologize that I'm going to have to jump off and can't participate in the questions because we do have a fall gathering here that I need to attend to. But I really sincerely appreciate the opportunity to be on and share with you some thoughts about this very, very important topic. I appreciate Governor Walters' comments to begin with, and again, thank you, Clay, and your colleagues, as well as Scott and AFR and Rob. I haven't had a chance to welcome you to Oklahoma. The schedule's been crazy, but welcome to Oklahoma. Hope you enjoy your time while you're here in our great state. Oklahoma is a beef state. We have more cows per square mile than any other state in the country. Now it's real close in terms of the second place. I believe it's Missouri. But we have more total beef cows per square mile than any other state. My friends to the north in Nebraska claim to be the beef state, and in fact, they have it on their license plate that they're the beef state. But in reality, I think we are. And now they do have us beat in one key area, and that's the main topic of part of our discussion tonight, and that's the packing sector. But certainly, there is no one that rivals Oklahoma in terms of our quality of seed stock. Our cow-calf producers, we can stocker, raise a yearling calf, if you will, on grass or wheat pasture better than anybody, much to the demise of our friends up in the Flint Hills. And we can feed cattle, although we don't feed as many as maybe our friends to the north and immediate north and south, but we do have a thriving feeding industry as well. So Oklahoma is prime country for beef cattle, and we appreciate that, and certainly want to see that those opportunities for our beef cattle producers improved. A couple real quick things that we see as far as the Oklahoma Cattlemen Association, as far as challenges, and I know the sun is setting, so it may be getting a little dark to see me, but nonetheless, some things that we're working on. COVID showed us that there were challenges in our industry that we knew were there, but that really were accentuated because of COVID. But also, we've kind of taken the approach that this has given us some opportunities. And what I mean by that is opportunities to identify where we have opportunities. Let me give you an example. So one of the first things that happened, what we saw during COVID, Governor Walters, you mentioned some of the bare retail grocery store counters and so forth. We started receiving calls from consumers on they're wanting to connect directly to an Oklahoma rancher to purchase beef directly from an Oklahoma rancher. So we put together a beef direct sales website it's a part of our website. When we released that listing of ranchers who provide beef directly or who can sell beef directly to consumers, we released that at about 8:30 on a Thursday morning. By 5 p.m., we had over 5,000 hits. We had several folks who were on that list who called us the next day and said, "I'm completely sold out." In fact, a few of them called and said, "I've sold calves that haven't even been born yet." I mean, that was they were just consumers were so aggressive, and so we want to build on that. We think there's an opportunity for producers to connect better with the consumers or more closely with the consumers and sell beef directly. Now, that's not for everybody. Let's be clear, because when you take out the middlemen, if you will, you do get closer to the consumer. We think you have an opportunity to gain more of the economic benefit from that as well, but you also take on more of the risk. You certainly take on more of the work, but we're a hard-working group of people, and so there's an opportunity there. But what that also showed us is another challenge, and that is packing capacity. Before COVID hit, it was difficult to find a slot to take your own calf to begin with, and now it is just incredible. We've talked to some meat processors here in Oklahoma who they're booked out through almost completely through 2022. Heard one the other day that's booking into 2023. I mean, that's just amazing in terms of the demand for packer space, if you will, or maybe a better way to say that is hook chain space. So we formed a coalition with the Department of Agriculture, a task force to look at how do we increase capacity here in the state of Oklahoma. Before COVID hit, there were on a weekly basis 900 hook spaces on a weekly basis in the state of Oklahoma. That's a tragedy. That's something we need to improve on. And so lots of different efforts to increase the number of packing capacity spaces, hook chain spaces, if you will, in the state of Oklahoma. Governor Stitt was generous enough to share some of the COVID money, the CARES money, so that we could write the grant process. I say we, Oklahoma, the Department of Agriculture did that, sent out dollars to 40 different facilities to increase cooler space, to increase educational opportunities, to train cutters, meat cutters, to increase capacity. Lots of different. If you look through that list of 40 successful candidates, lots of opportunities. But what was even more encouraging, in my opinion, is there was over 195 applications for those dollars. So that tells us there is a need, if you will, a desire for that type of processing here in the state of Oklahoma. And so we want to accentuate that. We want to accelerate that. So some of the things we identified, we need to find some funding in the state legislature for more state inspectors. We are at a shortfall in state inspectors. And what I mean by that is we just don't have enough to go to all the existing facilities as well as the newer facilities that are coming online to provide that state inspection that would then allow those producers to sell that product either by the cut or into a retail or food service chain. Custom exempt, as we all know, is a great way to slaughter cattle. I do that myself for my own family, but I can't sell that product. It's the product that comes out and says not for sale. So we need more state inspectors, certainly more federal inspectors as well. And that's a federal issue that we need to talk about as well. But certainly we think adding state inspectors is a great way to help provide more opportunities for producers to connect more directly to consumers, if you will. Again, building capacity is foundational. With 900 hook spaces on a weekly basis, let's say we get real aggressive and double or triple our capacity here in the state of Oklahoma over time. We all know it's not going to happen immediately, but over time we can do that. Is that going to make a huge dent, if you will, in the overall beef supply chain in the country? We go through 500 million pounds of beef a week in the United States. We are a beef eating country. So no, adding that much capacity in Oklahoma won't. But what I've learned is from my friends and colleagues in other states that other states are doing the same thing. And so while the challenges of trying to build a 5,000 head a day plant are just overwhelming, and what we learned early on is the reality of that is really not very high because of labor, because of cost, because of natural resources, water, etc. Maybe, though, we can add capacity if we look at the whole country. We could add 5,000 or more per head per day, per day on a countrywide basis and increase the overall capacity. And in the meantime, we're injecting in the local and regional rural economies, if you will, an opportunity for those cattle to be processed there and giving producers an opportunity to connect closer with consumers. And so we're working on some ideas to try to understand how we quantify that national packing capacity that's coming on board on a small scale basis, because again, it's very important to those producers that are using it locally. It's very important to those consumers who are using it locally. And we believe also, if we can understand the big picture, it might have an impact nationally as well in terms of capacity, because there's no doubt we need more competition in the packing industry. It's consolidated into 4 primary packers, 85% or so of the kill. We need more competition in that area. We think this is a reasonable way and an aggressive way to go about doing it, although it will be a challenge to do. There's some federal legislation that could be promising. I'm not a crystal ball guy. I don't know what's going to happen in the lame duck session. Probably the reality is we're not going to see much action out of Washington during the lame duck. And so we may have to wait until the new Congress, the new administration comes into play to really see much promise of any specific legislation. And when that time comes, if that's the case, when that time comes, what we would like to see is an opportunity for state inspected product that's equivalent to federal, which in the case of Oklahoma it is, be allowed the opportunity to go across state lines. Again, that's going to open up the markets, if you will, or the marketing opportunities, I should say better, for producers to sell their beef, again, to consumers who are interested in source-based or more program or niche-based. Governor Walters, you said niche-based. I like that word a lot, those niche-based programs. So equating state inspection that is equivalent to federal inspection, maintaining the robust food security that we have in inspection, allowing that product then to go across state lines, we think would be a very promising thing to do. Lots of other opportunities that we think, and I want to end with that, because I'm really, those of you that know me know, and many of you do, and I'm a glass half full guy. I think there's great opportunity in the beef cattle business, not only in Oklahoma, but nationally. I think there's great opportunity in the beef cattle business for small ranchers, for family ranchers. What we're seeing at our fall gatherings are an influx of young people. We're seeing strollers and young folks coming in with their trucks and footballs. We had a football game going on over the side of a fall gathering the other night between some young folks, and it was just fantastic. And so we're seeing those young folks who have a desire to come into the beef cattle business. Now, they're not going to do it like Granddad did, and that's okay. We just want to help make sure that they have the opportunities to do that. Maybe the way to do that is to closer connection to the consumer, that they have an opportunity in that sense. So we need to be more robust in terms of our packing capacity, providing some state inspection, providing them the opportunity to connect to the consumer. Again, I think there's a lot of opportunity there. So Clay, I want to end right there. Scott, I know you're on after me, and I apologize that I can't stay longer. I think I'm losing all my light anyway, so you're probably seeing a black screen, and I apologize for that. But I thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to you, and as well, thank you for the issue that you're talking about. And I wish this new organization success as you look at those rural issues and have these discussions on how we can inject optimism, we can inject stability into our rural economies in Oklahoma. I was raised in rural Oklahoma in Rush Springs, watermelons and beef cattle down in southern Grady County. And so I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you today. And I'll end there, Clay.
I appreciate the comments that Michael Kelsey, the Cattlemen's Association, made. I think we need to kind of know what happened during the pandemic at the beginning and with our food system to really kind of understand where we're at now in modern day agriculture and how consolidated our industry has really become. And never before, we've known this, as many people have said for a while, but during the pandemic, it was very obvious to everyone, including the consumers out there, of just exactly what was, something had gone wrong, and they didn't understand why the grocery store shelves were empty. We saw in different locations, different food products, such as bread, such as milk, such as meat, being empty in the shelves. But I think for our discussion today is we're going to talk about beef, is what I know most about, because I'm a rancher of 5 generations raising cattle and understand what's happened here. And I think it was the most obvious to the consumers when they went to the grocery store and they saw empty shelves for the first time, really, maybe in several generations, and not since the Great Depression had our consumers seen empty shelves in the grocery store. So really wake up call to consumers in America. But as we look at I like to say that the food chain is set up much like an hourglass. At the very top of the chain is hundreds of thousands of farms and ranches throughout this nation, growing the commodities, whether that be pork or beef, chicken, wheat, corn, soybeans, vegetables, milk, on and on and on, all the food that we consume. Hundreds of thousands of farms throughout the country supplying the raw commodity products. Then in the middle this is where the problem is. Our processing industry has become very, very concentrated over a period of many years. This has been going on for 50 years or so, and we've lost more and more processors throughout the country and less competition in the marketplace. And then at the bottom of our hourglass is our consumers. It's our schools. It's our restaurants. It's our supermarkets. It's other hotels and other institutional buyers of food products. And so as we look to see what happened during the pandemic, the next slide. Okay, so what happened was the workers in the plants, and especially, well, let's go back one step. So first of all, we saw a distribution problem at first, and we could not process all the workers. They went home. You work from home. We had a shutdown of the country. So people that were normally buying their meals at the restaurant, getting their meals at school, getting their meals at the hotels and all, now are all buying their food from the grocery store because that's their only mechanism. They're at home and they're buying food at the grocery store. That overwhelmed the distribution system of our retail grocery stores. Not just the store itself, but the processors who process that food because it's packaged in different ways. And so many, we saw milk being dumped all over the United States on the ground. And at the very same time, we saw a shortage of milk in the grocery stores. Now, why is that? It doesn't make any sense to very many people. Well, the reason is because we packaged about half of the milk in the country was packaged for a institutional, restaurant, schools, methods, and the other half was for our retail. Well, now you have all your consumers buying it at the retail outlets, the grocery stores. They're not going to school. They're not at the restaurants. And so you have the product backing up in the system, but not enough capability to change quickly and retool to meet the consumer demand that has now changed in how the consumer is buying the product. So we saw all over the country, vegetables setting out, saw it on TV everywhere, rotting in the fields, saw milk being dumped on the ground. We had instances throughout the country of both poultry and hogs having to be euthanized because there was no place to process them. There was no place for them to go. So in the livestock industry especially, we always had plenty of livestock. We never ran out of cattle. We never ran out of pigs or chickens. That wasn't the problem. We couldn't get them processed in a timely fashion to get them to the supermarket to meet the demand. Okay, so by late April, the U.S. meat plants were operating only at 60% of capacity. 935,000 fewer animals were being processed in a week's time. So what this did was this backed up our livestock from being processed, collapsed the markets. We had cattle prices crash, livestock prices crash, and at the very same time, we saw the retail price of meat skyrocket. So what have we learned from all this? Well, we learned we have too much risk in the system. So when you take a look, 13 plants in the United States kill 65% of the cattle in the United States, only 13. 12 plants slaughter 57% of all the hogs in the United States. So if any one plant goes down in their production for any reason, it doesn't matter if it's the virus or some other reason, we've got a problem. That's 5% of the total capacity in the United States to process those animals with just one plant going offline. So during the virus, and you see over time, so 1977, only 38% of the plants in the United States could process 1 million hogs per year. In 1997, it's up to 88%. And if we had good data today, it would be much larger than that. So what do we need to do? Well, we have to, the bottleneck is in the processing, the consolidation that we've had in the processing section. We have to widen that out. We have to have more processing. And like Michael Kelsey said a while ago, we have to do it in different ways. One of the ways that we can do that, so we saw our workers getting sick in the plants because of the virus. When you have a lot of people, just like in a school or other places, when you have a lot of people working in very close conditions, the virus spreads very quickly once it gets into the plant. So we had lots of plants throughout the country either have to reduce their operations and their daily kill, or they had to shut down completely for a period of time in order to get workers back healthy and make safety change in the processing. As you see, the plexiglass in between the workers here, these are some of the changes that were made then in the industry to try to limit the spread of the virus to the workers. What we need is more small and regional processing plants. We have become so consolidated in this processing industry, and especially in the meat packing industry. That's why we have the problems. So we need more small and rural mom and pop type processors throughout the nation. Bigger isn't always better. Maybe a bigger plant is more efficient in the terms of dollars in operation, but it does not equal stability in the food system, because it doesn't really matter what it costs. If there's nothing on the shelf to buy, the system has failed. So as we look, just how consolidated are we in the meat packing world? Well, four processors now control 83% of the beef kill in the United States and 65% of the pork kill. And two of those four are actually foreign-owned entities. They're not even U.S.-owned companies. So what can we do? Well, we need to start enforcing the antitrust laws of this country. The Clayton-Sherman Act was some of the first that dealt with this issue almost 100 years ago and put the framework in place to regulate. But our system is broken. USDA, Department of Justice, that we do lots of investigations. We've got lots of lawsuits throughout the country on this very issue, but we still haven't addressed the problem. One of the things we can do, the small mom and pop meat processors are not dead. Now, we have lost thousands and thousands of these small processors over the last few decades, but we are seeing a rekindled interest from the consumers. As Michael spoke about, they sold out in just a few hours once they put the beef on sale there directly from the rancher to the consumer. This is really a food security issue. And we saw that, you can't fight wars, you can't feed an army, you're in trouble. And we've said that we can produce the food, but we've got to get it to the consumers. And one way we can do that is with these smaller plants. We're seeing these plants, Michael talked about 2023, these small mom and pop plants here in Oklahoma are booked out. I can tell you, we see it all the way. I haven't seen a 23 one yet, but 2022, if you call up today and try to book a kill of beef or a pig or something, that's what you're looking at just to get an appointment to bring an animal in for slaughter. And we're not unusual in this in Oklahoma. This is going on throughout the country. It's just maybe a little bit more highlighted here, what we're seeing. So some of the things that we can do about this to help our small mom and pop and our regional meat packing processors succeed. So we need to support them instead of discourage them. We need to work with them and not have rules that are artificial to make it impossible for these little plants to meet the same standards as these giant multinational plants. So some of the things that are being done, one is the Ramp Up Act. This was authored by Congressman Frank Lucas here in Oklahoma. It is part of the HEROES Act now. It is sitting in Congress. Probably nothing will happen in this lame duck session, but who knows, maybe. This will give $100,000 grants to each one of these small mom and pop facilities in the United States that want to upgrade to a USDA or a state inspected plant. It will also give them money to speed up their capacity for their weekly processing numbers. That'll employ more people in the rural areas, more jobs in the rural areas, and keep our money here in Oklahoma and not send it over to Brazil or China. The CARES Act grant Michael spoke about, that $10 million of Oklahoma's CARES money was allocated to this very project. And so that there's many small processors in the state that receive some grant money to upgrade their old facility and get it into state inspected or USDA inspected. That way we can market that product directly to the consumers, the restaurants. Right now we have three types of facilities. You have a USDA inspected facility, you have a state inspected facility, and then you have a custom slaughter facility. And a lot of our mom and pop plants today in the state of Oklahoma are custom exempt. Now that means we can slaughter our own cattle there. I can sell you a half a cow or a share of a cow or a whole cow to slaughter there. But we cannot sell that to a restaurant. We cannot sell that to a grocery store. It has to be state inspected or USDA inspected, and we don't have near enough inspectors in either entity. The Department of Ag is struggling to put more state inspectors to work, and they need dollars to do that. And that is going to be a challenge going forward. The Ramp Up Act addresses this issue at the USDA level, on the federal level, for more federal inspectors. So we're hopeful that that legislation in the HEROES Act will eventually be passed and become law to get some relief. The other things we could do, Michael talked about their organization putting together some stuff that they can direct market. So the rancher, farmer can sell directly to the consumer, directly to the restaurant, maybe it's at a farmer's market or wherever. One of the things that my organization has really been implemented here is the Oklahoma Certified Beef Association. We've created that. That's a new law that just took effect November 1st in Oklahoma. that defines what Oklahoma certified beef is. And under the statute today, it is bred, born, raised, and processed in the state of Oklahoma. And then it can earn the name Oklahoma certified beef. We've set up an association at AFR in order to help our farmers and ranchers throughout the state be able to meet the requirements and keep the records and do third-party verification so that the consumer has confidence in that they're getting what they're paying for. We know the consumer wants to buy from the farmers and the ranchers. They want to know where their food comes from. They want that connection, and the closer you can get to the consumer, the better it is for everybody, because those dollars stay right here in Oklahoma. They stay right here in these rural communities, and they don't go somewhere else. They employ our people. Okay, that's kind of the presentation. I've got a little longer version of it, but they told me about 20 minutes. Is there any questions? All right, Clay, thank you.
Scott, I got a question.
Yeah.
For Oklahoma certified beef, it's got to be bred, born, owned, and processed in Oklahoma.
Yes.
What percent of our Oklahoma production today can we process in Oklahoma with the current processing system? How much will that have to increase in order to be able to be Oklahoma certified?
Well, it doesn't have to be an increase, but Michael said the other night there is 900 hook spaces in Oklahoma currently for beef. That means you could slaughter about 900 head a day in the state. And that's our current capability. One of these plants, these big plants that we're talking about, they do 5,000 head a day out of state. So we have to increase our slaughter capacity here in the state. There's several tribes that are actually have plants under construction, and there's several of these plants that are doubling their sizes out here in the country using some of their grant money. It's going to be a process. It's not going to happen overnight, but the consumer this way can identify the product as born, raised, processed here in Oklahoma by Oklahomans, and they know what they're getting. It adds value to, we think it adds value to the cattle, and it creates the jobs here in the state. So we're excited about it. It is going to take several years to really see a big impact of it, but we will see some immediately. Yes.
Do the other production associations have similar process for certification?
They can. And the way the law is set up, that anyone can do this. Any organization can adopt a program as long as it meets the statute. And it's very, very simple. The entire law was only 2 pages, the entire bill. And you hardly never, ever get that, today in legislation. And I will say, too, that this bill passed unanimously in the House of Representatives and the state Senate. So not one no vote in the entire state against this legislation. Nobody voted against it. So when was the last time that happened, that you had, urban legislators voting for it, rural legislators, Democrats, Republicans, independents, everyone supported this legislation. So it's very simple. We just took the lead role on it, our organization, but others can do the very same thing as we've done.
Scott, to drill down on my question, and the figures may not be available. What I was really wanting to know is how many head per day capacity would we have to have if all the beef born, raised, bred, in Oklahoma were to go to an Oklahoma processor?
Oh, I don't think we know.
What percent of those heads do we have today, so we know how far do we have to go?
Yeah, I don't think anybody has those numbers, but I'll tell you, it's a long ways. It's a long ways off.
Between inspectors and expanding the facilities themselves across the state, how much are you, if you could guess, how much would the state legislature need to fund?
Good question.
How confident are you that they'll be able to get this money in the budget?
Well, I'm really worried about the state's budget. We all know there's going to be a huge shortfall in money at the state level. There has been an interim study done at the state capitol on how many more meat inspectors. Department of Ag did a study. They're saying right now today they need to double their inspectors at the state level, the number of inspectors, in order to meet the demand. And that's before some of these new plants go online. And so we're hopeful that some of these we can get some USDA inspectors in here as well. And that's where Congressman Lucas's bill comes into play. And if that becomes law, that will really help us in federal dollars with federal inspectors. But it's going to be a real struggle for those state dollars in any way, shape, or form to get more inspectors. And we have to have more inspectors to grow this industry.
Scott, there's a number of examples in Oklahoma of industry-based fees. The oil and gas community sort of taxes themselves to clean up the hospital industry. Oftentimes we've gone through the provider fee set up to fund activities for additional care. Has there been consideration of if the economic value to this industry is enhanced substantially by having more inspectors, funding apparently between the CARES Act and the Ramp Up Act, we're going to see some of these mom and pops get out of the custom slaughter business and graduate on up. I wonder if there's a way for the industry to propose a self-imposed fee on themselves to pay for the inspectors to clear that bottleneck.
That's an idea that, today there's not any fee.
There hasn't been any discussion about that.
Not that I'm aware of. There hadn't been any discussion about it.
It might get things moving quicker.
Yep, because we know it's going to be really hard to come up with dollars at the state level going forward to do this. But they're already short of inspectors before the virus, and now it just with all these custom slaughter plants that are upgrading and more demand, more people wanting to buy retail, they have to be inspected. Those animals have to be inspected, slaughter. That means more inspectors. That's just, we have to have it. Yes.
On the retail grocery end, what can be done to promote the Oklahoma certified, basically make that more present in the retail side?
I can tell you, we're working with some of the smaller independent chains. Some of them you would recognize the brand names on. They're very interested in stocking the product. I think our biggest challenge is not getting it's not being able to get the product into the grocery stores. They want the product, and we could get it in there today. The problem we have is getting enough animals processed through the channels that have to go through with these state inspected or federal inspected facilities, and then to get them into the restaurants. We could sell a whole lot more product. Sky's the limit, but we have to get them processed. And that's what's going to hold back the rapid growth. It's going to slow this down. And as more and more of these plants come online, we'll be able to do more than that. But we have talked to a few of the independent grocery chains that are very interested in doing it.
You mentioned that thousands of processors have been lost over the years. Is this just a story of consumers going to massive consolidation, like you mentioned?
We've seen consolidation in lots of industries in the last 40, 50 years. The agriculture industry is no different. I just think it is, when we look at the meat processing world, it's just at an extreme level. When you're down to only 4 processors, major processors in the United States, that is extreme consolidation. Paul?
Someone had asked the question about the need for additional dollars for the to scale up the processing plants. And I think probably indicative of the need was when they had the recent grant application process and the number of folks who asked for grants and didn't get them, and the values of the dollars that were necessary. So can you speak to that?
Yeah, I can tell you the Oklahoma Part and Bag was not expecting the number of applications that they received. 195 applicants applied for the $10 million here in Oklahoma, and they absolutely couldn't believe it. And so that just shows the demand for it out there. And only, I can't remember the exact number. Michael said, I think 45 of the applicants actually received the money. And they ranked them, and they had a committee to evaluate those and choose them and spread their money out as far as they could. But huge demand out there. You know, the $10 million is a great start. We're very grateful that the governor appropriated that money to this project, but it's not near enough. And we need to do a lot more. All right. Thank you.
Scott. The next speaker we have this evening is Corbett Wall. Corbett Wall is a native of eastern New Mexico and West Texas. He's a fourth-generation cattleman and has been a livestock auctioneer for over 25 years. Corbett grew up at his father's side, taking delivery of county cattle purchases from New Mexico ranches and wheat pastures. There were also some of the first, his father and him were also some of the first to order stocker calves in the Southeast, partnering with shepherds from Louisiana, Mississippi, and Florida. Corbett received a bachelor's degree in agribusiness and economics, plus a master's degree in agriculture from West Texas A&M University in Canyon, Texas. Upon graduation, he started an 18-year career with USDA's Ag Market Service and Cards and Niche in feeder cattle market reporting as the author of the weekly National Feeder and Stocker Cattle Summary. In 2014, Mr. Wall accepted a position with DV Auction as their commercial cattle manager and livestock market analyst. He recently relocated back to the Texas Panhandle, and after being 16 years in Northwest Missouri, where he operated a small stocker cattle operation with his three daughters. If you would, help me welcome to the podium, Corbett Wall. Mr. Wall.
Well, thank you very much. I'm glad that Scott was a little early on his. I won't have to rush through mine quite as bad, and we'll still stay on schedule. But I've got a presentation here that I have used variations of for a couple of years here now. But I want to talk to you first about kind of where I come from, and it kind of goes along with a history of cattle marketing, commercial cattle marketing in this country. And I'm a fourth generation. If you look back to my great grandfather, his name was Willard Wall, and he lived quite a life. He was one of those cattlemen that was rich and poor several times during his life. If you know those kind of guys, they kind of let it all roll and just kept betting on the come. But he was born in and raised in South Central Missouri. And it's funny because I spent the biggest part of my adult life so far in Missouri too, but in the northwestern parts. But he grew up farming with horses and mules, and he absolutely hated it. And he remembered that until late in his life, and he told me how much he hated it. And his dream was to buy and sell big bunches of cattle. So when he was a young man, he would take a horse and a dog, and I was pretty good size. He was still alive. He lived a very full life. His funeral and his 100th birthday were on the same day. So he got very, very close, which is, I thought, very unique for him. But he grew up, like I said, South Central Missouri. Not a lot going on down there in the big waves of cattle, but he would take a horse and a dog and tell me that he would ride down the lane, that he called it, the road in front of their farm, and he would go about as far as he thought he could go, and then he would turn around and come back and buy whatever livestock their neighbors had for sale. And then him and the horse and the dog, they would drive the the herd of cattle, whether it was an old bull or a few calves or old packer cow, whatever. They would drive them on past their farm to a railhead, and then he would put them on the railroad and send them into East St. Louis there. And he had a younger brother that worked for a commission firm, East St. Louis Stockyards, and he would sort those cattle up and get them sold. And so that's what he loved to do. And he eventually moved out to western Nebraska and started buying big strings of cattle down the eastern side of Colorado. And so that's how he spent the biggest part of his life. Interesting story about my great-grandfather. I think it might have been this trip when we went to visit whenever I wanted to take that 4th-generation picture. He had told me he thought I was getting old enough he could kind of talk to me a little more loosely. And he told me that, he said, from the time I was a teenager until I was in my late 80s, he said, every single day of my life, he said, I drank at least a pint of whiskey, I chewed a whole plug of tobacco, and smoked a can of Prince Albert. And he said, it never bothered me too much, but I don't think a guy'd want to get hooked on it. But after his son, my grandfather, he went to World War II. When he came back, he had been traveling with my great-granddad, and he had went as far down south to northeastern New Mexico. And Clayton, New Mexico, he thought that was the cattle crossroads, and he thought that would be a perfect place to build a sale barn. Sale barns were starting to get more popular, and the old stockyards were kind of falling by the wayside. So he came, and in the late 40s, he built the sale barn that still is in operation, but has long been out of our family's hands. But he built the sale barn in Clayton, New Mexico, and that's kind of how I started out. I grew up in Clayton, New Mexico with my father, and we backgrounded cattle. We had a sale barn of our own. I became an auctioneer, and about the time that I was ready to set out on the world, I needed to put that college education to work because my dad's health started failing him. So I ended up working with USDA for many years, and like the introduction said, I now work for DV Auction as a market analyst. But I want to go back in time here and talk to you about cattle marketing. This is an old-time river market or a terminal stockyard. And if you can imagine packing plants surrounding this stockyard facility, and this could have been in Chicago or Kansas City or Sioux Falls or Chicago or Denver, any of the old terminal markets. But at that time, this would have been from the time of the cattle drives all the way up until the 1950s or 60s. This is the way cattle were marketed in the big stockyard facilities. And the cattle were marketed at a slaughter weight, not necessarily grain finished, because a lot of people just didn't have access or a way to feed grain, but a lot of them were grass fed, and it wasn't for a niche market or anything. It just kept the cattle until they were at a slaughter weight, and then they would ship the cattle into the stockyards. But that's how the lion's share of your cattle were marketed to go right into slaughter. Now back, like I said, before the 1960s, people didn't sell calves and yearlings like they do today. They kept their cattle until they got to a slaughter weight. And I've been fortunate enough with my USDA career to work in old terminal markets in South St. Paul, in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, the old stockyards there, and in South St. Joe, Missouri. And a lot of the old stockyard guys would tell you, back in the days when the stockyards were rolling big, if you were in the calf alley, they called it, if you were trading calves or lighter weight cattle, feeder type cattle, you were kind of a second class citizen. All the action was in the hog barn and in the slaughter cattle alley. But back in these days, you would consign your cattle to a commission firm. So the commission firm would take your cattle, they would bring them in, merchandise them, much like a sale barn would today, and have the cattle weighed up and ready for show to your packer buyers that would come around and buy them in the alleys. They didn't have auction rings like they do today. But they had rules back in those days to keep everything on a level playing field. So one of the rules in most of the stockyards is your packer buyers couldn't enter the yards until, say, 9 o'clock in the morning. And then, they knew all the different commission agents that were going to be offering them cattle for their customers, but they couldn't just run right to their favorite guy. They had rules to keep things balanced out. So typically they would just draw out of a hat which firm you would go to first, which it kept guys from playing favorites with each other and just running to their buddy every morning at the same time. So you would start out, you didn't know which firm you were going to start out at, and then they had a rotation you went to. So it kept guys from playing favorites. It kept a very fair and honest market there. And you had packers and stockyards agents that were walking up and down the alleys, making sure everything was on the up and up. You also had market news reporters with USDA that were walking up and down the alleys and gathering that sales information and then putting it out a lot of times on a ticker tape type recorder or through the phone lines to get a fair, honest, transparent market out. And this is the way things went. We were kind of missing that kind of a fair, balanced trade today. About the 1960s, they had several years of bad winters in the Midwest, and they were getting tired of fighting the cold and the mud and the wet conditions in the Midwest. And this is when you saw your big commercial feedlots move out here to the Great American Desert, which we call Kansas, Oklahoma, and the Texas Panhandle. But this is when you saw your big commercial feedlots come in here and build a facility on the side of a slope there that they hope drained pretty well. And it was at this time that you saw your packing plants also migrate from the cities where your terminal markets were. And they came out here to be closer to your big commercial feedlots. And these started springing up, like I said, in the 60s. And by the mid 70s, you started to see the complete demise of your terminal markets. It just wasn't efficient to move your cattle around that much. But it was also at this time you started seeing packer investment into feeding cattle. Prior to this, packers and stockyards didn't allow for any packer ownership of cattle because it was a conflict of interest. It's still pretty much in the laws there, but the laws aren't enforced. And so that's what's wrong with our industry right now. You saw packer investment into these feedlots that were pretty much owned by feeding groups at the time. Eventually, you started seeing packers completely buy huge facilities like this and build their own. They would just call them Caprock instead of Cargill, or they would call them Five Rivers instead of JBS or Swift, and they would just change the name of them. But it was also at this time when packers owned their own cattle in these facilities, they really didn't need to come up with a price for what those cattle brought. They were their cattle. So having to establish a market price for those cattle was kind of inefficient whenever they were their cattle to begin with. I want to go back to the early 1900s, like 1900 to 1903, 1905. We had a great American president at the time by the name of Teddy Roosevelt. And he loved this country probably as much as any American ever loved this country in its history. He loved our free market system and everything about it. But it was at this time whenever he saw that your free market system did not work well when you had monopolies that came in and would take over, whether it was in the steel industry or whatever it was. And he got to have the name of a monopoly buster. And one of the biggest monopolies that he busted was called the Beef Trust. Now, the Beef Trust was, at that point, there were 6 packers that had control of 50% of your business. And you think that's pretty highly concentrated. I think Michael talked about this earlier, but today we have 4 packers that control around 85% of your business. But we don't see any monopoly busters out there to really break this up. So we need to get some help out here. But another thing that I like to show, these are political cartoons that were in some of your biggest publications at the time. And you see the meat scandal, and it was a stinky mess, and Teddy Roosevelt digging into it, and your beef trust here. But I just want you guys to try to imagine having a political cartoon that was all about the beef business being in Wall Street Journal or USA Today. We would never see that today because your average person doesn't care about your beef. It's kind of like we've already talked about. People went to your beef counter during the worst of the COVID, and they wondered why there wasn't any beef back there. We'll make some more. People just don't have a concept of where their beef comes from today. And part of it is because it's been too long since we've been hungry. People might have been out of money, but they've never been short of food if they had the means to get it in their lifetime and in their parents' lifetime and their parents' lifetime. And also, we've gotten to the point where we're so far removed from the farm. So we say about 2% of America's population is directly involved in production agriculture, maybe 2%. And then you cut that down to just animal agriculture, it would sure be less than 1%. And so we're so far removed, even up until the 1970s, most of our people, even our people that lived in urban areas, they had a grandpa or an uncle or somebody that lived on a farm. And a lot of times they would go stay with them during the summertime, and they got to learn about where our food comes from. But we're so far removed from that today. There's been several studies, and it's a fact today that the lion's share of your elementary school children cannot draw a line from a hamburger to a cow and a piece of bacon to a pig, because they just have absolutely no concept of that. And we've got to the point where we're so far removed, people don't know and don't spend a lot of time thinking about where their food comes from. This is kind of a busy slide, and I don't expect you guys to look at all of it. But if you look down this side, these are the different ways that you can sell finished cattle. I say fat cattle a lot because we feed cattle to be fat so that they grade better. But finished, market-ready slaughter cattle out of your commercial feedlots. These are the different ways you can sell them. Negotiated cash is the main one I'm going to talk about. Negotiated cash is where both the buyer and the seller have some say in what the eventual price is going to be. And my best way to describe that is, if you guys ever watch the American Pickers on the History Channel, which I enjoy watching that. So they're walking through this guy's junk, and they pick something up out of there and blow the dust off of it, and they start looking at it, and all of a sudden that trinket becomes very important to that seller. He may not have even known it was there, but it becomes very important to him. It's kind of like toddlers when a playmate comes over and picks up a toy that they may not have played with for a long time, but all of a sudden that toy becomes very, very important to those kids. But when they start haggling over those trinkets and those items, that's negotiated cash. What do you want for this? I don't know. What do you give? Here's what I'll give. What will you give? And they come together and then eventually shake hands. That's a negotiated cash trade. And most people would think that almost all of our cattle are sold that way. A lot of our feeder cattle and calves are sold, but the auctioneer is doing the haggling, right? And so it's done at a lot faster pace. But we don't slaughter cattle, steers and heifers, are not sold at auction that much anymore. Same reason I told you earlier, it's not that efficient to haul those big animals around to the facilities as much. So we see the trade done more at the facility or over the phone or something like that. But negotiated cash is what we're lacking because we don't have a fair, transparent market and a way to establish that price. So cash formula is basically selling cattle off of last week's cash market. So the market that was established last week, well, we'll just take this many cattle off your hands and we'll sell them basically off last week's market. We're going to give you a premium for these and we're going to discount you on those. And that's what a formula price is. And that's what's pretty much taken over most of our marketing. Forward contracting is done some, but it's not a major way. Negotiated grid is your second best way to sell finished slaughter ready cattle. Basically because of the negotiated, but the negotiated part of it is where you negotiate your base price and then they sell those cattle dressed and then there'll be premiums and discounts off of that negotiated base price, but at least you have some negotiation in there. But if you look back in 2005, and I go to 2005 because that's when mandatory price reporting that we have through USDA, which is mandated through the government that your large packers have to turn in their purchase information twice a day, every business day for transparency. And that's whenever mandatory price reporting started getting really good. They started it in 2000. By 2005, it was getting really good. So in 2005, in our 5-area feeding region, which Texas, Oklahoma, which Oklahoma's cattle feeding area is pretty much just done up in the Panhandle. Your commercial feeding is almost all of it in Oklahoma is in no man's land or your Oklahoma Panhandle area. The meat of Oklahoma is pretty much reserved for cow-calf and backgrounding operations. But Texas, western Oklahoma, and eastern New Mexico is an area. Nebraska is an area. Colorado is an area. Iowa is an area, and Kansas is an area. That's where almost all of your cattle are fed. Your finished commercial cattle are fed in your 5-area feeding region. But in the 5-area, back in 2005, you notice that still well over half of our cattle were still being marketed negotiated cash. By the time we got to 2017, you think, why'd you stop in 2017? After 2017, Colorado was not reported as much because it didn't make it through the transparency confidentiality rules because there wasn't enough participants. Basically, one packer does all the buying in Colorado, so they can't divulge what they're doing. So we kind of lost that transparency in our market reporting. But by the time we got down to 2017, we were running about 25%. So that makes you believe or understand that about 75% of our cattle are sold off of what 25% of them bring, which I call the tail wagging the dog. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. Now, if you look at Texas, Oklahoma Panhandle, and eastern New Mexico's area, the one of the 5 areas there, in 2015, which was kind of a crash year after the record prices of 2014, you'll notice that negotiated cash only made up 2.6% of the volume of cattle being sold. So I'm not a mathematician, but that means that 97.4% of the cattle were sold off of what 2.6% of them brought. So that lends a pretty easy way for that 2.6% to be manipulated in price because, I mean, it wouldn't take much of anything. So we may think that we're wheeler dealers in Texas, where I'm from, but actually I don't think we're that big of wheeler dealers around. I'm not sure J.R. Ewing would agree with it. But here's some more graphs that kind of show you this. The blue or purple is negotiated cash back in 2005, and you notice by 2018 that your orange Pac-Man called formula pricing had pretty much gobbled up all the other ways to sell finished cattle. And this is a bar graph with 2005 broke down into your 5 areas there. We noticed that in 2005, pretty much all 5 areas were still selling close to half of their cattle in a negotiated cash way. By the time we got to 2017, you notice that in the southern plains, in Texas, Kansas, and Colorado, which is mostly all eastern Colorado, they were falling way down. And your market was getting established in the Midwest or the northern plains in Nebraska and Iowa. So this brings me to talk about what I'm really trying to talk about here is your one cash price per week. That one cash price. Every week, the majority of your cattle sell at one cash price. So last week it was $1.07. This week, we're expecting it to be a little bit better than that, basically because your futures market were up so big yesterday, but somewhere between $1.08 and $1.10. That one cash price, that's what everything in your cattle industry is built around. That's what your futures market is based off of. That's what your market for yearling feeder cattle or calves is based off of. Everything is based off that one all-important cash price each week. So whenever that doesn't have a lot of strength to it, when you don't have a lot of leverage in it, then that hurts your entire cattle marketing aspect going all the way down. Well, you look at Iowa over there. So Iowa's still selling and still today selling over half of their cattle cash. And you think, well, why is Iowa doing that? When you think about it, it's because you have so many farmer feeders in Iowa, independent farmer feeders that are marketing their corn through their cattle. And so that's why they try to do that. Well, a lot of the times they don't have a lot of facilities. They just maybe have 1 or 2 pens with bunk down the side and a load and chute on one side. No alleys or working facilities because they never really thought they were going to need those. But the problem with Iowa selling that many cattle and being the only ones that are selling the majority of their cattle cash is they're the least armed to do it. Because a lot of times they'll only have cattle ready once or twice a year. If they're feeding their own cattle or they buy one set of cattle, and when they're farming, they don't feed cattle because a farmer is just that. They're farmers. They only feed cattle to add to their farming. And so when they're busy farming, they're not going to mess with cattle. But like right now, a lot of them are coming in buying cattle for a winter project. But they're the least armed to deal with the packers because they only have cattle ready once or twice a year. And I always say it's kind of like tipping the waitress when you're on vacation. I mean, you're never going to see her again. So, you know, how important is it that you take good care of her? But your packers that have the big commercial feedlots that deal with packers every single week, well, then that's just like going to your local coffee shop every morning, and the gal that brings you your coffee and eggs, you usually take pretty good care of her because you know you're going to see her again the next morning. So basically, your Cowboys are no match for the Packers. And this is pretty much every single week in your negotiations, your Packers win. They've got home field advantage. They've got all the leverage. They're more skillful in the negotiations, and they basically win. And a lot of people don't realize that the Packers name came from being beef Packers, but that's where the Packers came from. And the Cowboys, of course, the same way. But we talked about these black swan, these really devastating events that happen in our marketing. And if you don't know already or haven't figured that out, this is August 9th, 2019, Holcomb, Kansas. Tyson Fresh Meats, Finney County plant. So anybody that's in the cattle business, commercial cattle business, I know I was getting them. You started getting texts this night. It was on a Friday night. We were having our first football games. So this is very, very important. And everybody that really knew what was going on, whenever they found out that a 6,500 head a day plant was on fire, their heart just sunk. Because we know that we're very vulnerable as cattle producers, that if we lose a cog in that wagon wheel, that things are just going to go awry. And so that's kind of what we felt whenever that plant caught on fire. And then you look over here, what eventually happened, your box beef cutout values, if you look at 2019, which was last year when they had the fire, this is your wholesale beef prices. Box beef cutout values went straight up $22 a hundred in about 6 days. So at the same time that your wholesale beef prices were going up $22 a hundred, your slaughter cattle market went down about $3 per hundred. So this pretty much spoiled the myth that cattle producers are in the beef business. If we were in the beef business, we'd get to share in some of that, right? We're in the cattle business. Your packers are in the beef business. And it's like I've said a lot of times, I don't understand why we have to advertise for them because they get to take advantage of this. Cotton producers don't advertise for fruit of the loom. But you notice that this was not really fair. There's a lot of conspiracy theories out there. You guys can believe in those if you want. But that's what really irked a lot of your producers and your feeders and people in the business is this plant is made almost entirely out of what? Concrete and steel. Both of them very hard to burn. There was fuel for a fire in one little bitty room. It was some boxes that hadn't been put together yet to ship product in. They were folded up and laying on the floor in this utility room. And I'll be darned, that's where the sparks flew. And so that's where you got this fire. And, I've told people many times in this presentation, you could have turned a whole gooseneck load of 10-year-old boys with their own box of matches in that plant, and they'd have never got a fire started. But somehow a fire got started in that plant. Another thing that happened is it did burn up some electrical things and stuff in that utility room. We had talked to people that went in there to repair that, And they said that this plant could have been back up and going within 3 weeks or a month, and it took multiple months to do it, because what else did they do while it was down? They did a complete remodel on the plant. This was one of those plants that was built in the late 60s whenever they followed the cattle out west. They come in there, they raise the rails up to accommodate the bigger cattle that we're slaughtering today. They put in a lot more stainless steel. There was a lot of HACCP things they needed to update. Got a complete remodel of this plant while it was down. And you think, well, why'd they do it then? Well, they couldn't afford to shut this plant down to remodel before, because they had already promised the unions 40 hours a week for all those workers out there. So they couldn't afford to pay all those workers to sit at home 40 hours a week while they were in there redoing that. But if you had a disaster like this, you have insurance for those type of things. So the insurance picked up the payments to their workers for the guaranteed hours that they were to pay them for, and then they were able to do this. But all that is kind of conspiracy theories. Another conspiracy theory is all of your Western Kansas feedlots had a Tyson buyer in their feedlot office on a Thursday or Friday since time began. But that particular Thursday and Friday, they couldn't locate their Tyson buyer and couldn't get them on their cell phones. It was almost like they knew they weren't going to be needing any cattle for the next week. Okay, now we've got another disaster that came in this year. We're not sure how this deal started, whether it started in a Wuhan laboratory or a wet market with people eating their rats medium rare instead of well done. But nevertheless, we had the things that have been talked about already. We saw the slowdown in the plants, not able to keep your workers there. And then we saw this complete spike in the same thing we were talking about earlier, your wholesale beef prices. Your box beef market and choice went up. I thought it was a big deal. In our last slide, we were talking about $22 a hundred. This was over $250 a hundred. It was just complete. And we feel like at some level there was some price gouging going on, taking advantage of your consumers that were in panic buying mode. It was also just supply and demand and logistics. And on top of all the things that they had problems with trying to get the processing going, it was also trying to get the product trucked to where it needed to be and getting it put out to the consumers there. But this was terrible. And I tell you what, if we didn't realize how vulnerable we were as cattle producers during the fire at Holcomb, we sure knew it after the worst of the COVID. You look at your all-important negotiated cash price right here, where it was rocking along there until it got to where the worst of the COVID was, and you saw your negotiated trade plummet. And it went all the way down to where it was hardly any trade at all. So on top of all these things, we've seen a lot of transfer of ownership within our processing. So I talked about Swift. Was one of our big four packers there several years ago. Well, JBS, which is a Brazilian-owned company, came in and bought out Swift. And so then we had a Brazilian-owned company as one of our big four. Well, then several years later, we saw that National Beef Packers sold to another Brazilian company called Marfrig Global. So now the Brazilians own half of our big four slaughter capacity. And it makes you wonder, my gosh, is Brazil like the center of the universe when it comes to beef? Yes, they are. Brazil is much bigger in the beef business than the United States. And now they've got half of us too. So this is a major deal. One thing, and also our regional packers, which we've talked already, and some other speakers have talked about the need for more regional packers. So we have our huge packing facilities. We need our regional packers because they're the ones that push for quality, and they will push for supply whenever they need it. And I'm talking about with the market. They'll push. And it's very important that we have a healthy regional packers, but we're quickly losing our regional packers. So Creekstone, which is just up the road at Arch City, Kansas there, that's been one of our premium regional packers there. And in fact, they have sold out to a Japanese interest, so we've lost them. Marfrig Global that bought out National, they have come in and bought Iowa Premium, which is your Tama, Iowa plant. That's another regional plant. So they're all getting gobbled up by these bigger ones, which your vertical integration just keeps going at a more vertical angle there. And then I want to talk about how JBS, whenever the JBS come in and bought Swift, they also were looking for a source, because if you own a packing plant, what's your biggest problem? You need supply. You need your needs covered. So they need supply of cattle. So where are they going to get those? And they knew that was going to be a problem, because in Brazil, you have these huge ranches out there. Most of their cattle are grass-fed. They come in right off the ranch, and you make a contract deal with those ranchers, and they bring those cattle in until you've slaughtered all of them, and then you go to another big rancher. Well, whenever you're dealing with smaller producers like we have in the United States, you have to go out and look for feeder cattle, and you have to get those cattle fed to find, or else you're going to have to push the market on slaughter cattle. And then nobody wants to do that if they're in the packing business, which it's not efficient, because we're in vertical integration now. So they bought Five Rivers Cattle Feeding, which was Montfort Feeders before that. The largest cattle feeding operation in the world with 1 million head capacity was Five Rivers Cattle Feeding. They used to supply Swift with all their needs. Well, JBS went ahead and bought those too, because they knew they were going to have needs for slaughter cattle. The big problem JBS had was with the logistics of buying feeder cattle to fill those feedlots, and so that they could eventually fill their needs as a slaughter plant. But so they just had a hard time getting around. They didn't understand how the auctions worked. They didn't understand the flow of cattle. And so they were used to dealing with long yearling cattle or 2- and 3-year-old cattle. They were buying ball and calves that get sick and die. They were having a lot of problems with that. They would end up sending multiple buyers into the same sale barn to bid against each other to buy cattle to send for the same order. It just didn't work. I was up in Kansas here just a couple of weeks ago, and I was talking to an auction facility owner up there. And he told me that when all this was going on, he had a big feeder cattle auction, and he said he sold 3 loads of cattle to Five Rivers, bought by 3 different buyers. And then they all shipped to the same feedlots. And then he said within a couple of weeks, he had corporate Five Rivers calling him upset that he allowed that to happen. He said, "Hey guys, I'm just selling cattle. If you want to send 3 buyers in here, that's your deal, not mine." But they just didn't understand how all that worked. So they eventually got to the point where they're thinking, we really don't want to feed all these cattle. We just want the cattle that come out the end of the feedlot. So we want to sell this capital absorbing entity that we have. Well, who would buy it? Fund managers. Fund managers are all about our ag commodities, right? You always wonder why the board's up or the board's down. Well, it's all about the funds, what the fund's doing, which is just companies that manage other people's retirement money and try to have a bigger return than their stocks or CDs or something like that. So Five Rivers Cattle Feeding was basically sold to 3 fund managers that pooled their money and bought that entity. And basically, your largest cattle feeding operation in the world is owned by your California Teachers Retirement Fund. And that is the principal owner of Five Rivers Cattle Feeding. Caprock, which was Cargill's cattle feeding operation, Caprock also decided to disperse. They watched what JBS did, and they said, we really don't like feeding all these cattle either. And so they ended up selling their feedlots to, they kind of split them up between Freona Industries, or FI, in the Southern Plains, based out of Amarillo. And they had a long time been a supplier for Cargill with their feedlots. They bought about half of them. And then Green Plains, which is into ethanol and fund managing, bought the rest of Caprock's cattle feeding. But that's just kind of showing you how the vertical integration just continues to go together. But if you guys kind of notice, what I've been talking about here is this is the way that your rural cattle producers, whether they're cow-calf producers or backgrounders or whatever they are, this is kind of the way that they live their life. And this is the way that they enjoy living their life, the way they choose to live it, raise their family, pay the taxes on their property and hold their property holdings together. And this is what they accept. I mean, this is hard work, and a lot of people wouldn't enjoy it, but the people that do it love it, and they love the lifestyle. And everything that they see in these pictures, they're good with, they're fine with. And so you look at reality of where we're heading, it doesn't look nearly as much fun over there on the other side. And I always say that Lonesome Dove, the book or the movie, wouldn't have been nearly as popular if Captain Call and old Gus had been running a confinement hog operation. It's just not as romantic, and you don't have, a chance to interact with people that much, and it's just not as much fun. But your hog industry back in the 80s and the 90s was doing everything that we're doing now. We're just going step by step. You had the majority of your independent hog feeders were under contract with the big pork plants at that time, and there were getting to be fewer and fewer of them. You guys remember the Omaha hog market? That was a big deal back in the 80s and things. I know whenever I was a little kid, if you were yapping whenever the market on the radio said the Omaha hog market, you'd get in trouble because that was very important. And that was a daily price that was all important, and all your hogs were based off of it. We're working with a weekly price, but your pork producers pretty much had the whole thing to themselves, except for they were having to establish this daily price. That got to be a real pain, and they got to where they just didn't really want to have to do that anymore because the majority of the hogs already belonged to them. So what did they do in 1998? They took your hog market to 8 cents a pound. Cost of production on a finished hog at that time was in the low 30s. So they took your hog market to 8 cents a pound. You think, well, gosh, if they owned all those hogs, wouldn't they have lost money too? Well, what difference does it make? They'll make it back on the pork, because they owned them. It was 6, 1, half a dozen to the other on them. So they basically just make a wash. It didn't matter to them what the market was. That was a problem. They didn't want to have to establish that price. So in 1998, whenever they took the hog market to 8 cents a pound, that eliminated all your independent hog feeders. So you don't have independent hog feeders anymore. They're all under contract unless they're in some type of a niche market. And that's very, very few of them, a few show pig raisers, and that's about it. But we don't have independent hog feeders anymore. Nobody cares what the hog market is anymore because nobody has any hogs. That's just what it did. I remember in 1998, I was running a USDA market news office in New Holland, Pennsylvania, and there was a cattle buyer and feeder from Virginia that used to come up and buy cattle every week. And he came into my office that week, which he never came in there, but he and I were good friends. And he wanted me to print him out the hog market, the USDA hog market for that day. And I said, it's 8 cents. It's 3 cents on sows and 2 cents on boars. That was the market. And he said, can you print me out a fresh sheet? And I said, sure. And so I went and printed him one out, and I took it, and I said, what are you going to do with that? And he said, I'm going to take it home, and I'm going to frame it, and I'm going to put it above my desk. And every day when I go in to sit down, I'm going to look at that, and I'm going to know that that's what's going to happen to your cattle market one of these days. And I've always thought about that, and we've gotten closer and closer and closer to it every day since then. We have more reasons for concern. Do you guys know what this is right here, what this logo is? That is the logo for Beyond Meat's Fake Meat Company. So Beyond Meat's Fake Meat Company has a mission statement. Their mission statement is to eliminate farm animals from protein production. Not to glean off of them a little bit or try to steal a few % off or cut down it or anything. Eliminate farm animals from protein production. That sounds pretty threatening. So you look at that logo and you think, well, if your mission statement is to eliminate farm animals from protein production, Why would you make your logo a steer? And then why would you dress it in drag just to tick us off? That's exactly why they do it. And if you study marketing and advertising, that's why they do it. Nobody drinks Budweiser anymore, but they continue to promote Budweiser because that's their core product. Everybody drinks Bud Light, but they still continue to promote Budweiser. That's one of the rules in advertising. You stick to your core product. Another one of your core rules in advertising is you take the bull by the horns. You go straight for it. So if you're trying to watch college football or news or Yellowstone, you guys like to watch Yellowstone. I know I do. You can't make it through one commercial break without seeing Impossible Whopper commercial or something like that. That's who they're going after. They're not worried about the left-leaning type people, your vegetarians, your fruits and nuts and things like that. They've already got those people. You go straight for the bull and you take him by the horns. Not that they think that they're going to sell any of that to us, but they're going to slowly make it to where we accept that. And we're sitting on our heels. Today, I don't know if you guys noticed, but today a news release come out that McDonald's early in this next calendar year will be introducing a product called McPlant. And it's a plant-based hamburger. And McDonald's was one of the ones that we were kind of hoping would stay away from that kind of thing, because we know that Burger King has really gone away from that. But this whole campaign to push alternative protein or fake meats, what I'd rather call it, that is all about going straight for that. Why else would they go and find the brother of a world championship steer wrestler that came from a 4th-generation beef ranch out of California to have his cowboy outfit on the commercial, take a bite out of the Impossible Whopper and say, well, I'm a damn fool. You guys have seen that commercial too. That's Luke Branquino's brother. They picked him because he was Luke Branquino's brother, because Luke Branquino is a rodeo hero, multiple-time world champion, and they came from a multi-generational ranch in California. But his brother also had a contract with a personal management company, and they came to him to be on this commercial, and he sold out to them. That's what we're up against, guys. And your fake dairy industry has taken about 17% market share from your dairy people. Your dairy people all laughed and joked when they said, oh, how are you going to milk an almond? Well, they thought that was real funny until they took 17% of their market share. I don't think we can stand 17% market share loss in the beef industry. China is a big concern. We've seen China has a lot of mouths to feed. China, for the most part, feed their people, which I say they feed their people. Everything's state-owned. You got to understand socialist economy and the way they live over there. They feed their people pork for the most part. Well, the biggest problem they had in China was the swine flu over there, and they got it bad. And it actually cost them about 50% of their hog production. You think, well, how much of 50% hog production could that be in China? That's more hogs than we raise in the Western Hemisphere. And so that's what people were used to eating on their rice, was little pieces of pork. And so these people are getting dangerously hungry. And if you look at some of the people, this kind of a typical picture of China, you wonder why they don't look me dead in the eyeball. They've been malnourished for generations and generations and generations because they've lived in this socialist economy. And then they don't stroll through the meat counter and wonder what they're going to throw on the grill for supper that night. They're going to eat the same thing that they had the night before. They're going to eat rice with a little bit of broth and maybe a few pieces of pork on it. But there's a lot of mouths to feed. They're starting to get a glimpse with the introduction of internet starting to seep into that country and things. They're starting to see a small, if any, separation to a middle class there, with some people having just a little bit more money and they want to eat better. And so that's very important, because the more of our fed product that we can get into China, the sweet meat. Why do we feed cattle grain? Because it makes it very sweet. And these people that prefer grass product, it's simply not as sweet. That's why we feed cattle grain, is to make a sweet meat and have that finish on there very sweet. But so that's important. And whenever these people in China get a taste of that, they'll start to demand it. And in our last administration, President Trump, that was part of his goal, was to starve China out to the point that they had to come to us and start buying more beef products. That's part of the reason that he made the deal where he had the tariffs on there, and he had China having to buy a minimum requirement of farm products from us, but they mostly filled it with grain. If you've noticed, over the last few months, we've seen a spike in our grain prices right during harvest, which we hardly ever see that. But they were also coming into our market on beef, and we've got a lot of opportunity to sell more beef products to China. They've just about exhausted all the other places that they can get it. New Zealand, Australia. Australia's had horrible droughts the last few years. They've pretty much milked them dry, and they are starting to come in more and more to our U.S. market. So what can we do? We can stop being idiots. The definition of an idiot is somebody that does the same thing over and over and over and expects a different outcome, right? So what are the things that we can do? One of the biggest is we need more fall calvers. 75% of the beef calves born in the United States are born in the first half of the year. How much sense does that make when people eat beef year round? So our backgrounding facilities, our grass, our pastures, our feedlots, our auction markets, everything that we need to use to grow and market cattle have too much burden on them in the fall of the year, because we're trying to sell all these calves that people had in the spring. You go out here and talk to these guys at El Reno at OKC West. They don't even want any more calves. They got all they can choke. They don't have any more places to send them. Our feedlots are slammed full of summer yearlings and the first of the spring-born, fall-selling calves. And we've got lots more calves to sell, and there's no place to go with them because everybody does it. With only 25% of our calves born the second half of the year, we've got a shortage of calves in the springtime when we've got green grass. You know, your cows can lay down and have a calf in green grass just as easy as they can a mud hole or snowbank. I've seen them do it. They can do it. But people don't prefer to do that. That's the way grandpa did it. That's the way their great grandpa did it. That's the way they're just always done. But we've got too many, and our genetics have gotten better, but we're at the point now we've got too many 600-pound fat balling calves to sell in October, November, and we can't choke them all. So we've got to change that for people that live in arid climates and more moderate type of weather like Oklahoma in the southeast, places like that, the lower Midwest. We need more fall calvers. And I know it shakes up their schedule a little bit, but we need more of it. I believe that we need a minimum negotiated cash trade mandate. This is something that NCBA does not support, but we've got 2 bills before Congress to make it a law that your major packers have to purchase a minimum requirement negotiated cash to keep them honest. We can't break up the monopolies anymore, just the way that our system is going. But if we put in a minimum requirement of cash that your packers have to buy per facility each week. So the one that Chuck Grassley put up in the Senate is called 50-14. So it was going to have all your major packers would have to purchase half of their cattle that they bought each week through negotiated cash means. Well, that means they would have to get in there and really compete against each other for cattle to get half of their requirement made. It's your Nebraska cattlemen, your Iowa cattlemen, they all have policy for that. So it was very easy for them. Come into the Southern Plains, Oklahoma, Texas, Kansas, and them did not. And they actually do not want this. It would, and I agree, it would be a big ask for your Southern Plains packers to do that. There's a lot of packing facilities in the Southern Plains that haven't bought any cash cattle for years. None. All they have is schedulers. They don't have a procurement office. They don't have a cattle buyer. They just schedule cattle in. Deb Fisher is a senator from Nebraska. She has introduced a bill called the Cattle Market Transparency Act. That is another one that calls for a minimum negotiated cash mandate in your major packing facilities. That one is being pushed. Also, Vicki Hartzler in the House, she has introduced the same bill in the House side. It's getting a lot of support. So there's two bills that we could get some legislation for. So I probably get short on time here, but I want to talk to you about two of some of the coolest guys when it comes to cowboy stuff. And you guys know these ones over here on the left, but up on the right, that's Robert C. Atkins up there. Robert C. Atkins is the one that invented the Atkins diet. It's called the keto diet, or isn't that how you pronounce it? Is it keto? Yeah, keto diet now. Basically the same thing. But he saved America and keeping our consumption of beef at a high level, because you eat steak and eggs for every meal and you get smaller. The one down here, that is Memphis Charlie McBain. Memphis Charlie McBain is almost completely responsible for your 2014 market. He decided that he got tired of your funds selling off your futures market all the time, because the industry itself put so much pressure on your futures market through hedging, that in 2012 and 2013, he saw that your beef cows in numbers were smaller than they'd been since the early 1950s. And so he decided, hey, I think we have an opportunity here. And so he started rolling the market up. He rolled the market up. He exhausted all of his purchasing limits on the Chicago Mercantile Exchange with live cattle futures. He pushed all of them as far as he could. He used all of his customers, and then he started buying other people's limits, rolling the market up. And eventually your funds saw what was happening. Then they got along for the ride, and they kept rolling the market up, took your fat cattle market all the way up to 172, and your calves were selling for $3 a pound. Everybody was driving new pickups, and there was never going to be another poor day. Well, eventually your balloon busted. And then you had your Commodity Futures Trading Corporation, which polices the futures, come in, and they told Charlie, we're going to fine you. And he said, well, how bad is it going to be? And they said $5 million. And he said, no problem. So I'd always like to mention with DV Auction, we're a market broadcaster. We broadcast auction markets and bull sales, a lot of them every week. This is something that we've started here the last several years. When we're selling these cattle and broadcasting that over the internet, this information down here called the weight board has all the specifics to those cattle, the class, the head count, the weight, the price. And this is good market information as we're gathering it. And it doesn't cost anything. We don't have to pay somebody from the government to go and report those prices. You can put together market reports that are very similar to what you get from the USDA and your state departments of agriculture. This is all automated, got head counts, weight ranges, average weights, and average prices. And this is something we're doing, and basically we could cover every market in the nation with this. We use that to estimate your CME cash feeder cattle index. It works very good for that. We also put together market screens that have all this information on there. I do a feeder flash, which is daily market report video every day. Here's the different places you can find it: Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. and on our website, nationalbeefwire.com. So I appreciate you guys' attention. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For our final speaker this evening, we're honored to have with us the president of the National Farmers Union, Mr. Rob LaRue. Rob was elected president of the National Farmers Union during the 15th president, of NFU during the organization's 118th anniversary convention in 2020. He previously served as NFU senior vice president on public policy and communications, advocating for family farmers and ranchers in rural communities in Congress and the executive branch. Prior to his employment with NFU, Mr. LaRue served for over 22 years in Congress and USDA working on ag policy and communication. Most recently, he was the staff director of the House Committee on Agriculture, where he oversaw the committee's efforts for the 2008 and 2014 farm bills. He previously served as director of Congressional and Public Affairs at the Food Safety and Inspection Service at USDA and worked as the agriculture aide to Representative Collar Peterson and the late Senator Paul Wellstone. Mr. LaRue was raised on his family's dairy farm in Greenfield, West Virginia, graduated from Virginia Polytechnic Institute and State University with the bachelor's degree in dairy science, and completed graduate work in agronomy at Pennsylvania State University. Help me welcome Mr. Rob LaRue, president of NFU. Thanks for being here today.
All righty, thanks so much for the introduction. And I guess I just should start by letting you know my early years relationship with beef and in particular steak. In my house, we had steak every Sunday for dinner. It was there every week. And I have to say, we didn't necessarily look forward to it. Every Sunday, we would have the thinnest cut, broiled, till it was just about leather consistency, old cold dairy cows for steak. So it took me a while until I probably went away when I became a teenager to really understand that what I was eating was not steak, was not truly beef. And once I discovered beef, I never looked back. And so I haven't eaten an old cold dairy cow since then. But it's been great to be here in Oklahoma. This is an incredibly important topic that we're talking about. And obviously, there's been a lot of information that we've already learned. We've learned about the effects of consolidation on the beef industry throughout, some of the reasons for that. We've also learned specifically about what has happened this year with the pandemic and the supply chain disruptions and what that has meant not only for independent ranchers out there, but also for consumers. And so one of the questions that we should all be thinking about right now is, where do we go from here? What do we do with this information? And there are a number of things that we can do and a number of things that we should do and think differently, a little differently about. The challenge here is immense. As many of the speakers just talked about, you have a system that is so overwhelmingly tilted toward the packers right now, such lax enforcement of antitrust laws. And really, in many ways, consumers, with the exception of some price challenges this year and supply challenges at the grocery store, otherwise, the supply is always there. They're not really connected, as we've learned. So how do we begin to try to address the challenges that we have in this industry? Well, I think there's a number of things. First of all, this is the U.S. One of the things fundamentally that we focus on here in the U.S. is transparency. We can think about that in a couple different ways here. We just heard about some legislation that would bring transparency to the cattle market. What is more American than making sure that we have working, functioning markets out there? This really shouldn't be a question. But not only do we have a lack of transparency in these markets out there, we have a system that is inherently keeping it opaque, if you will. So we not only need to make sure we can build in that transparency, but that we remove the barriers that are there in the first place. Where else do we need transparency? Quite frankly, we need transparency at the label for consumers. Consumers also, as we've heard, they want to know where their product's coming from. They want to support U.S. beef. They want to support here in Oklahoma beef. So the efforts that are taking place here in Oklahoma, I congratulate the industry for stepping up, working with consumers, and it's a system that, if given the resources to make happen, will be really beneficial for everyone in Oklahoma. What we also know, though, is that, again, we have a system that is inherently creating a lack of transparency on labels for consumers. We've had the battle in in past years and past farm bills over country of origin labeling. But in that battle, some argue, oh, that's a past battle. Oh no, the battle around labeling continues today. Because although it is possible for folks to affix different labels on there, one label that continues to be hugely misleading is product of the USA. Seems pretty simple, product of the USA. Now, USDA handles labeling related to meat products. The Federal Trade Commission handles labeling on all other products. They just promulgated regulations that clarify once and for all that if you are going to use product of the USA on any product here in the country, it has to be, every component of that part or the vast majority of it. The standard is high. You can't just have an 80% product from other sources and 20% from the US and label it product of the USA. And yet, for meat, that standard is completely different. If product is come in to the US and is mixed and further processed, and that can be cutting up a larger cut of meat into smaller pieces, that can have product of the USA. USDA inspected, product of the USA. Why are we allowing this lack of transparency? Consumers want it. Independent ranchers want transparency in the marketplace. How are we going to get there? Well, I would argue that while the stakes are high, and they are truly high, and the challenges are great, let me just stop for a minute there and talk a little bit more. When we talk about some of these challenges, they're going to have to be addressed ultimately with the law. So that means getting an act of Congress through. That's not necessarily an easy task, particularly when, as was mentioned earlier, we have less than 2% of the folks actually engaged in agriculture. A much smaller subset of that were actually in the cattle business. If you think about in the House of Representatives, there are 435 members of Congress. There are 35 of those, 35, that have a district that is greater than 50% rural. Okay? So the stakes are pretty high there. The Agriculture Committee itself in the House of Representatives has 47 people on it. So that means that clearly there are a number of people on the Agriculture Committee that aren't from a predominantly rural district. I actually think that's a great thing. We need that diversity. We need folks sitting on the Agriculture Committee that aren't necessarily from predominantly rural areas, because what else are they bringing to the table? They're bringing that consumer interests. They're bringing all those demands that consumers want. They want safe product. They want product from the U.S. They want to make sure that they have that steady food supply. Those are the folks that we need to make sure are our allies in this. And so as a farm organization, National Farmers Union, or any of the commodity groups out there, producer groups working on this, we understand we're not going to be able to do it by ourselves. We have to work with others. Many of the bills, to give a little bit of encouragement, many of the bills that were actually referenced earlier by Corbett, talking about bringing transparency there. Some of that support there is not only from non-rural districts, but is also bipartisan, because we're going to need that. We just had an election, which just further highlighted the fact that in many ways we're very divided. So we're going to have to work together to try to get these things fixed. We know that we also have the advantage, if you will, kind of a silver lining for all the challenges and kind of tragedy associated with the pandemic, that the consumer now more than ever understands how the system works, and it often works against them. So they understand that when you have disruptions right now, that farmers get hurt, the middle folks end up making some profit at the expense of consumers. They don't want to see that. So I think it is a good thing because you're going to see that support for the initiatives for increasing those local and regional food systems. I think it's a pretty, I won't say an easy lift, because it's going to take a lot of resources. It's going to take a lot of effort. But that's kind of that first tier, I would argue, that I think the support there, you build that in. Next tier, I would argue, it has to be done at the same time, is really fighting for that level of transparency, whether it's on the markets themselves or it is on labeling. And probably also, to really get at the heart of what a lot of this is a need to get a handle on this antitrust. National Farmers Union, the organization that I am so proud to represent, got its start at the turn of the century when Teddy Roosevelt was out there fighting all the monopolies. Farmers were at huge disadvantages. It had the nation's attention. It wasn't just in agriculture, it was in a lot of industries, and went about recognizing that this was not good for the country. Now, somewhere along the line, around about in the 1980s, during the Reagan administration, there was a shift in the way that we looked at antitrust issues. And the shift there was they looked at the final price effect on consumers. As long as, but these mergers and what it did along the way in the chain was irrelevant. And so after the Reagan administration, throughout both Democratic and Republican administrations since, we have seen just an enormous increase in the acceleration of these mergers, of this buying up. We've seen all the changing hands here. And we talked today about the beef industry, and there was some reference to, if you will, the chickenization of the dairy industry, of the hog industry, and the effects that this is having on the beef industry here. But there are other pressures that we need to keep in mind, because we know also that vertical integration is happening. This isn't just about independent ranchers out there. This is about the fact that you also have Walmart calling me up at the beginning of this year saying, hey, farmers should be excited because Walmart is getting into the beef industry, in the beef processing industry, and we're going to bring more competition. That's what you guys want. I think what they're missing is the fact that this is exactly what we don't need, because now we have a lot of these big grocery operations also doing the food processing. You have, I'm thinking Sam's Club, but not Sam's, Costco doing the chicken processing, right? So when does Amazon buy up Tyson? When does, these, huge mammoth companies that are further up the chain continue to force this pressure down? I think this is actually one of the spaces where we're also going to get the help of the consumer. Because consumers, while they might see benefits to just going on Amazon, get that quick delivery for whatever products they need. They also understand that they are getting much fewer choices in where they go to shop. If they're looking at the tech industry, there are much fewer choices there. And it is actually in the tech industry, I think that we're going to see, a lot more focus on bringing attention to antitrust. And you better believe that as farmers, we're going to be right there, making sure that as we look at that and we try to begin to try to get a handle on it and get greater enforcement, strengthen the laws, give it teeth. And I would add, as been mentioned before, but that's Packers and Stockyards Act. It's one thing to have laws that are on the books, but if it isn't enforceable, if it doesn't have teeth, and if you don't have staffing to do that, then it's pretty much meaningless out there. And so we need to have all of these pieces lined up. We can't just focus on just the transparency piece. We can't just focus on, trying to build up the local and regional markets out there. We have to get a handle on this overarching problem that we have here. Because as has been mentioned before, but I think it's worth repeating, this is not inevitable. This continued acceleration toward greater and greater consolidation, it's happened before in our history, and we changed course. That can be done again, because the choice that we're doing right now is not to do anything, and that's simply not sustainable. So I appreciate the time to come here and talk about this, because this is critically important. And there are a lot of things that we could be further. I want to be cognizant of time. But at this point, I guess from our perspective, from Farmers Union, very much engaged in this from the get-go. It's where we got our start. Would be happy to take any questions that folks have. Hey, thank you, sir.
We do have time for just a few questions. Do you have any questions for Ms. LaRue or any of our other speakers that we've had here this evening? Yes.
Clay, my Ron, Corbett, and others, the solutions page went pretty quickly for me. And so one of the things, and I'm sure it exists someplace, but you talk about transparency in markets, transparency of the label. Corbett had a list of solutions there. It'd be helpful to some of us who are public policy enthusiasts and see a lot of folks, particularly as there's a new administration coming to town and wanting to take a fresh look at a number of things, to have that consolidated. And so is there a list by category of here's what we do at the USDA and the FTC and by industry, here are the things that would move the needle, such that, it strikes me as I'm listening to this is like a drink from a fire hose, of course, but as I'm listening to this, the most promising thing I've heard is direct marketing, and somehow working with that technology to try to make those connections and begin to get rid of those bottlenecks, because 20 years from now, 25 years, that may be how everybody gets their meat, but we're not there yet. We should be heading in that direction. But where's the compendium of all the things that we need to change?
Well, that's a great question, and I'm not sure that we have a complete list there, but certainly
at least a list of legislative suggestions that are out there, that when we talk to when I call Libby Snyder at the DNC, who is in charge of rural affairs, and says, where are you all on these items?
Absolutely. And so as a farm organization, we are communicating that directly to the transition team for President-elect Biden. The Farmers Union, National Farmers Union website currently has legislation that we've endorsed, many of the ones that was mentioned earlier. And that's not only on the market transparency, but as you mentioned, it's also on bills like the Ramp Up Act that Frank Lucas, Colin Peterson, and others are supporting to give the local processing folks a little bit more capacity there. So I think that those two pieces, the tougher one, quite frankly, in terms of solutions, is the antitrust enforcement and teeth. I think, one of the things that we certainly will be focused on is if we just look back a few farm bills now, but the 2008 farm bill had a competition, a livestock competition title in there, which brought a lot more language into the Packers and Stockyards Act, brought a lot more clarity. Now, that ultimately led to a lot of challenges that was delayed, but it is time to bring that back. It is time to bring those kinds of solutions back into the next farm bill. We're still a few years away from the next farm bill, which is exactly the time that we have to be engaging this next administration as they get underway, this new crop of congressional and Senate leaders. So when we talk to the Libby Snyders and those out there, they understand exactly which bills are in the best interest of not only, and again, I think this is important, not only independent farmers and ranchers out there, but also consumers, and that is a winning combination.
And the primary marketing point is the collapse of our food chain security, or is it trying to save the mom and pop processors and farmers and ranchers? What's the selling point?
Well, I think it's two things, right? It's about rural vitality, because it is anytime that you can keep independent farmers and ranchers on the farm doing what they do best, that means that you have more people in that town. That means you have more businesses in the town, right? And that means that you have more kids going to those local schools. So it really is, I think, for those folks looking for rural solutions, I think it is that. And then obviously, with the tie back to the pandemic, you have to talk about that food security element as well.
Any other questions? Yeah, if I could, and I apologize for this, technology is a wonderful thing. I should have had Mr. LaRue up here. If you could come up and talk up here, Mr. Wall, if you'd like to answer that question, in this microphone up here, which is actually our live stream microphone, might be a little better for the folks at home to hear it. I apologize for that, and I should have done that to you, but that's what my technological expert just pointed that out to me. So.
I wanted to ask a question, and is National Farmers Union, have they endorsed any of these transparency acts, both of them, or which one are they behind more, the 5014 or the cattle market transparency?
So National Farmers Union has endorsed the Grassley bill, and I can't remember which number that one is. And the Deb Fisher bill, we certainly support elements of that, but want to kind of, we have contacted their office, want to continue to work there. Part of it ties back to what we have specifically in our policy, and what we don't. So it's not necessarily against it, but the Grassley market transparency, absolutely, we have strongly endorsed it.
Any further questions? Well, if not, we thank you all for coming out and being with us here tonight. Let's give our speakers all another round of applause real quick. Thank each and every one of you for joining us here at El Reno in the audience, and thank all of you at home that are watching this on live streaming. Remember, this is also going to be recorded and up on YouTube for later use if you missed anything or would like to share it with anyone or want to see it again. Also, I'd like to point out that this, again, is the first of one of these forums that we're going to have. We are planning on having another one on issues dealing with rural broadband that we will probably be doing sometime in January. Please keep your eye out for that in future press releases and news events. But we want to thank each and every one of you be here. We want to thank AFR, OFU, and the National Farmers Union for also helping sponsor this along with our organization. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you all, and we appreciate you coming. Have a good evening.